Wasabi guys, Void here coming back at y'all with another 10 underrated commander cards. If you are unfamiliar with this series, basically what I do is I take 10 cards that I personally feel are underrated in this format and deserve to see more play. These are just 10 cards in really no important order. It's not a top 10 list or anything like that. So let's start it off here with the first one that I have, True Conviction. A 6 mana enchantment that sits on the field, gives your creatures double strike and lifelink. Kind of expensive and a little bit more specific in mana cost. It is 3 white, so keep that in mind. However, I do feel that the strength in this card is very similar to a lot of the anthems that we have in this format. And I honestly even think that it's better. Because while we do have a lot of pumps and we have a lot of overrun type effects in this format, giving good keywords is always preferable than just straight up huge power and toughness. If you can give some sort of added benefit to attacking rather than just swinging into creatures, trump blockers, stuff like that, you're also gaining a ton of life with this at the worst case scenario. So even if your creatures aren't going to be swinging in for lethal, you're gaining a lot of life. You're just gaining this huge life cushion. It's going to make it easier for you to win, and especially in a combat-based deck where it's all about trading blows and you want to be able to come out on top, and this really sort of gives you that extra bit of advantage there. And I absolutely love this card, and I put it in a ton of my combat focused decks in white because it's a brilliant card. Then number 9 we have Rain Academy Chancellor. You can't really beat it for the budget option that you have here, and for the fact that it's also a wizard, which wizards are a pretty popular creature type, and there's a mono blue version of wizards that this is a pretty nice inclusion. Basically, whenever you or a permanent you control becomes a target of a spell or an ability, you get to draw a card. So this does give you that extra bit of card draw. While this doesn't straight up just stop whatever your opponents are trying to do to you, it does give you card draw, which in a lot of scenarios, that is enough to stop your opponents from doing what they want to do. So she's a pretty cheap card, not that expensive. You can get her, pick her up, she's pretty easy to get. Throw into your blue decks, wizard decks preferably, pretty nice inclusion. And then we have Baron Master Wizard, Legendary Wizard. Basically, you pay 2 mana and sacrifice a permanent to return a target creature to its owner's hand. So you might think that's a pretty big cost to do that, but really it's fantastic and it's what you want in blue. It's a pretty, the activated ability, you're paying 2 mana and you're sacrificing a permanent, so unless you're playing tokens, this is likely going to cost you either a land or a creature you really don't want. So it is kind of risky, but when you consider the fact that in wizard decks, combat isn't really your best strength, you want to take advantage of any sort of bounce effects that you can get. It's likely going to save your game. Yeah, there's going to be situations where you can't target creatures, such as with Voltron commanders. That's really the only weakness to this type of card, is that, yeah, it does target, but it's still pretty good. Bounce removal is blue's way of removal, and it's also a wizard, so you can throw it into Wizard Tribal, and it's not a terrible inclusion. The next we have Liliana of the Dark Realms. Very underrated planeswalker option. Her plus is a swamp tutor, and it's not just a basic swamp. You can search up an overgrown tomb, a watery grave, and her minus is fantastic. It's either going to be removal or a huge pump, and pretty good in mono black Voltron. If you want to make a Skithiryx, the Black Dragon deck with Infect, pump them up pretty big with this type of effect, or you can just sit back, use it as removal, so not terrible either way. But her ult, though, is just fantastic, and it works really well. If you like these mana sinks like Death Cloud, if you like Torment of Hailfire, this is the card for you. Her ult is basically going to give you quadruple your mana. So if you're just playing all swamps, you have enough mana there to likely win off of like an Exsanguinate, anything like that that can just kill all your opponents at once. Just a spectacular planeswalker here. All of her abilities are relevant. You can't say that for a lot of the other Lilianas. Next we have Diaochan, Artful Beauty, all the way back from Portal 3 Kingdoms, and her activated ability is something that I think would fit pretty well in a group hug strategy based deck. So if you're playing Kineos and Tyro, or if you're playing Zedru, or any sort of group hug strategy where you think that you can bargain with your opponents, well, you get to destroy something of your choice and an opponent gets to destroy something of their choice. Yeah, this has the downside of they could easily just destroy Diaochan, but likely they're not going to, because you're probably not going to be the biggest threat at the table, and Diaochan is actually going to be a huge asset to your opponents if you're in that group hug type of mindset. So keep that in mind. It's not going to see competitive play in a lot of red decks or any sort of control deck, but this is a perfect group hug card, and it doesn't see nearly as much play as I think it should. I mean, you're talking about destroying creatures of your choice. That's fantastic. Then we have Thrun, the Last Troll, one of the most underrated Voltron options in this entire format, and for good reason. He can't be countered, and he basically has hexproof. He has the old wording for hexproof, and he has the ability to regenerate himself. So no matter what, it seems like this guy's not going to leave the field. I mean, the only thing that would deal with him, just mass sacrifice removal or mass exile removal, and that's about it. It's usually just either destroy or something like that. Targeted removal, bounce removal, stuff like that. It's not going to deal with him, and even if it does, he is still just 4 mana there. You can get him out there for 6 mana, not too much of a problem. And the fact that he has basically hexproof means that you can just throw all these auras, all these equipments onto him, and you can just swing in there. And he has the ability to regenerate himself. He can't be targeted by your opponent's stuff. So he makes the perfect Voltron option in these colors. He is mono green, which is the only downside. And he makes a pretty solid option as one of the 99, as just a creature there to kind of grind out games for you, because he is likely going to stay on the field for a long time. Pretty good card, pretty good creature, very underrated option. And then we have Triad of Fates from Theros, little 3/3 human wizard legendary creature. Could be a commander option. However, I just like them better as one of the 99. I mean, you have these awesome activated abilities here. The first one, which is just to pay generic, tap it to put a fate counter on another target creature. And the second ability, you pay a white, tap it to exile that creature with the fate counter, and then return to the battlefield under its owner's control. This is likely going to be a way to protect your creatures if you choose to use the first option there, or the second option. And then the third option is what you use to basically just get rid of whatever your opponents have. So you put the fate counter on it, and then you wait. You pay the black, tap it to exile that creature with a fate counter on it. It doesn't come back though, so instead its controller draws 2 cards. So you could use this the best possible way, which is to exile the biggest threat on the field. We're talking about something like an Avacyn, Angel of Hope, some gigantic creature that's just problematic and can't really be destroyed. So you need to exile it. But you could also use this on yourself. So you could use this on a creature token, something like that, something insignificant that you probably aren't going to miss. Exile it, draw 2 cards. That's also pretty good for just 1 mana and tapping it. The main downside to this card would be the fact that it doesn't really do anything to untap itself, and these aren't just activated abilities without the tap requirement, so you can't really just abuse this with a ton of mana. It's not really a mana sink. Unless you have some sort of Staff of Domination type of thing that can untap it, I really don't see this card seeing a ton of play. Just the fact that you have the advantage here of exiling your opponent's creatures if you want to get rid of them, or blink your creatures if you have an awesome ETB, or if you just want to draw 2 cards. I mean, you have that option. I think it's quite underrated. I think 3 different activated abilities. It's not an overwhelming commander option in these colors. That's not something I would prefer, but as one of the 99, it does put in some utility there. Then we have Sidar, Kondo of Jamura. So he has flanking. Whenever a creature without flanking blocks it, that creature gets -1/-1 until end of turn. Not super crazy. However, your opponents can't block creatures you control with power 2 or less with creatures that don't have flying or reach. And he's obviously a partner there, so you can throw him into something like an Ikra Shadiki type of combo there. Something that also benefits from having a high toughness. Sidar also has high toughness too, so it kind of works out pretty well. Almost like a pseudo Doran the Siege Tower type of deck, if you choose to combine those 2 different partners. But yeah, I love this guy. I love the artwork. It's fantastic. I mean, flanking is pretty underrated. It is -1/-1. It's not anything more than that, but sometimes that's all it really needs, and you're capable of dealing with problematic creatures. But yeah, I mean, basically giving those creatures unblockable that have power 2 or less. I mean, there are some pretty good creatures with power 2 or less that really kind of get around that, such as Doran the Siege Tower. Swing in with creatures that deal damage equal to their toughness rather than their power. That's the ideal situation here. And with Ikra Shadiki, you also have the ability to gain a ton of life too. So there are a lot of useful ways to throw this guy into a deck, and I honestly think he works out pretty well in green-white humans as well. There's a lot of potential for this guy, and again, like I've said with a ton of the partner commander options, we need more support for this keyword, this creature type. I think if we had it, a card like this would see a lot more play. And the next one we have is Jor Kadeen, the Prevailer. Now, I'm not going to lie to you, this guy is not something you want to throw into your Breya decks or anything like that, because it's completely different than the strategy that you want to do with this guy. this guy is all about combat. So what you want is an equipment-based deck, something like that, to where your creatures get the Metalcraft trigger. They get +3/+0. You need to control at least 3 or more artifacts. That's pretty much what Metalcraft is across the board. And giving 3 power to your whole team just by having 3 or more artifacts is actually quite insane when you think about it. All you really need is any sort of token enabler, anything that can double your tokens, anything that can give you a huge team. Think of something like a mere battle sphere that basically accounts for the whole Metalcraft right there with the tokens that you get off of it. And those tokens get +3/+0. So yeah, I mean, you basically can just get a ton of power on the board right there just by having this guy as your commander. I don't think he makes a better commander for the whole Brea deck. He was included there, but obviously if you want to sort of deviate from the status quo when it comes to artifacts, this guy would be a pretty awesome option to use. I mean, go more with a combat focused deck rather than just a combo one. So I wouldn't recommend him over the typical artifact deck if you're used to playing it, but red and white, that's a lot of combat, a lot of aggro that you can throw into a deck like this, and giving sort of an overrun, sort of a Metalcraft buff there is pretty nice. And the last one we have here is Sisters of Stone Death. Has 3 pretty awesome abilities. The first one, you get to pay that 1 mana there to force creatures to block Sisters of Stone Death, and then you get to pay 2 more mana to exile creatures that are blocking or being blocked by Sisters of Stone Death. So that's just amazing. Flavor-wise, that's fantastic. This is exactly what Gorgons do. Once they stare you in the eyes, you're turned to stone. That's fantastic. And then the last ability, you get to put a creature card exiled with Sisters of Stone Death into play under your control. That is insane. How this hasn't caught on yet. I know that this card is 8 mana. I mean, yeah, it's easy to avoid. Just don't play creatures, or just don't attack with your creatures, or deal with Sisters of Stone Death because they don't have hexproof or indestructible. But still, in any sort of Golgari-based deck where you can just reanimate creatures at whim, with Marin of Clan Neltoth, stuff like that, you can just bring it back over and over again, and just, hey, attack with her. Force your opponents to block, and then exile those creatures. You should have enough mana if you can pay the 8 mana to player. You should have enough mana to then deal with your opponent's creatures and then, hey, play them. So the potential value, I should say, that you get with a card like this, it's amazing. I mean, being able to steal your opponent's creatures, that's essentially what it's doing. And even at the worst, you're exiling their creatures. The bad thing about it is that it might be a little bit slow and it doesn't have protection for themselves. That's about it. But other than that, I think Sisters of Stone Death should see just a little bit more play in this format. And I love a lot of these older legendaries from the Ravnica block. They were really kind of tame, but at the same time, I love the flavor that they have. And I definitely love this card. So anyway, guys, that was 10 more underrated Commander cards. Hope you enjoyed it. Let me know if there are any cards that you think are underrated that I should consider for a future video. I will definitely like to look and see what you guys have to say. Anyway, you have a wonderful day. Void here, signing off.